Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing a compilation of ghost stories and hauntings. Let's get into it. Story 1. Before I get started, I'll share some background information. The location where this happened is my grandparents' home that they have owned for 20 plus years. Many of my relatives have had unexplainable experiences in this house. My grandfather says the man who owned the house previously died in the home as a result of an accident. People, including myself, have heard footsteps, dishes and glass breaking, things falling, etc. It's summertime in my small town of Albany, Kentucky, and I was about 12 at the time. The county fair was going on, so my parents dropped me off with my friends, and my grandparents picked me up later that evening because they lived close to the fairgrounds. I've always been really close with my grandparents and would stay the night with them frequently. This night, however, I didn't feel very welcome. I was in the guest room, which had been built onto the house some years before that I slept in every time I stayed the night. I had gotten ready to go to sleep, so I had the TV on for the light, but I had it muted. After tossing and turning for what felt like an eternity, I was still uncomfortable. I turned the bedside lamp on and finally started drifting to sleep. I was barely conscious in that half-awake, half-asleep state, lying on my side with both my hands tightly tucked underneath the pillow. All of a sudden, I was jolted awake when I felt something or someone grab a section of my hair and pull really hard. Growing up with a mother who fixed my hair every day, I was not tender-headed. When I opened my eyes, although I didn't see anything, I was understandably terrified. I was frozen with fear. I really couldn't move for what felt like an eternity. When I finally got the courage, I tore out of the bedroom and ran down the hallway to my grandparents' room. I was crying and frantic, telling them what happened. My grandfather got up and got his gun, went through the house room by room, thinking someone may have broke in. No one was in the house besides us, and there were no signs that anyone had gotten in and left. The next morning, I had a huge welt in my hairline where my hair had been pulled so hard the night before. I have had so many other stories to share about this house, but those are for later. Story 2. This story happened in Kentucky in 2017, and then again in 2019. My mother was ill for a while and always said she never wanted to be placed in an old folks' home. She wanted a promise, so to make her feel better, we said we wouldn't. But as it happened sometimes, her illness got worse. We couldn't keep her at home anymore. We had to place her. I cried for 2 weeks, thinking I had broken a promise to her. She wasn't there for long before she passed in 2017, 3 months before her birthday. Days after that, tired from all the commotion of the funeral, I was awoken from a sound sleep. I heard my mother call my name. I quickly got up out of bed and went to her room to see what she needed, but the bed was empty and I remembered she had passed. I went back to bed and cried. For 2 weeks this happened, and every time I would automatically get up only to be greeted with an empty bed. It stopped after a while and life went on. 2 years later, in 2019, my father got sick. His hospital stay was brief and he passed quickly. And again, for 2 weeks straight, I heard him call my name. I got up to go help him only to realize he had passed. I know this may sound weird, but I talk to my folks at times, telling them I love and miss them, things like that. When alive, both parents were a buffer to an in-law that would get creepy whenever we would talk, text, or write. We would get in fights, and he would get nasty and rude. With them both gone, he wants to text again. I simply asked to myself, if trouble will come of this, for 2 weeks I'd wake up hearing yes. My question was that my folks' voice I heard after they died? And is this my folks warning me to stay clear of the creepy in-law? Story 3. I was quite young at the time this happened. I would venture to say I was no older than 7. Before my parents divorced, my family lived in Kentucky. The home was built in 1910. My siblings and I have reports of odd things happening, but this is the most upsetting one for me. During my time in the house, I frequently experienced disturbing and recurring nightmares. The atmosphere of the house was unsettling and tense. I was never very happy there. One night, I had woken up very late. I decided that I didn't want to sleep in my bedroom alone, so I walked down the short hall to my brother's room and started setting up a sleeping arrangement on the toy chest at the end of their bed. As I am doing this, I turned to the right and looked at the doorway adjacent to me. I saw an angelic, beautiful woman standing there. She had a flower crown and white garment on. She just stood there looking at me carefully and calmly. I froze with fear. It felt like the wind was knocked out of my chest, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. I regained as much composure as I had at the age of 7 and booked it to my parents' room, which was connected to my brother's room luckily. I hid on my mother's side of the bed that blocked sight of the doorway. I stuck my head under the covers that draped over the bed and never felt so helpless. The unsettling ambience that my father's CPAP created did not help the situation. My mother wouldn't wake up, and I was not willing to risk being seen in order to wake my father. I peeked out from the side of the bed, and she was no longer in the doorway. I still did not feel safe moving, so I slept on the floor that night, halfway under the bed. I have a suspicion that this experience may have sparked a streak of disturbing existentialism while we lived in this house. Many nights I would come to my mother crying and telling her of my fear of death and inquiring about the afterlife. I'm sure it worried her, given that I couldn't have been older than 7 at the time, but it came to a stop shortly after we moved. I'm not sure if anyone has had similar to this experience or has had any commentaries on it, but please do not hesitate to leave your thoughts in the comments. Before I end the story, I would particularly like to hear what people think of the angel. I have always been very wary of the intentions and origins of her, but I also have no other definitive ID of her. The memory of her instills great panic in me, and I feel intensely paranoid just writing about this incident. I apologize if this feels rushed and or unorganized, and I thank you for taking the time to read this. Story 4. When I was 20, I moved into my first apartment, which was in an older home in the Highland area of Louisville. It was a beautiful home, and the rent was super affordable for the area. Despite sensing a feeling of a presence during the walkthrough, I was still excited to move in. It didn't take long for paranormal activity to start. One evening, my roommate and I were hanging out in the living room, and all of a sudden a picture frame and books flew off the built-in bookshelf next to us, as if they were pushed off. I think it's important to note that these were very deep built-in shelves. If the frame and books had just fallen over, it would have still been in the shelf. We just looked at each other, completely in shock of what had just happened, and trying to rationalize how it could have happened, but knew unless they were pushed, they wouldn't have flown off the shelf the way they did. The next occurrence happened when I was in the shower. I saw a tall, dark figure walk past the shower door and assumed it was my roommate, since he was tall and work uniform was black. I started talking to him, but got no response, and didn't see anyone pass by again. When I got out of the shower, I went around to the other side of the bathroom to the sink vanity area and said, "Hello, did you hear me?" Only to come around the corner and find no one there. I looked in the adjoining closet, still nothing. At this point, I was feeling scared. I called my roommate and asked if he had just been home and had come into the bathroom. His reply was, "I've been here at work all day. I won't be home until tonight." I remember hanging up, getting dressed as quickly as possible and leaving the house and calling my roommate back to tell him what happened and to call me when he gets home because I didn't want to be there alone. A few weeks later, I was just waking up and laying in the bed when the bedroom door slammed shut. It was slammed with such a force that I was stunned. I thought it had to be my roommate, or maybe one of our friends had spent the night and thought it would be funny. I went straight to his room and found it empty. I went to every room of the house, empty. I looked outside, my roommate's car wasn't outside anywhere. I called him, asking if he had been home and had slammed my door shut. He replied that he had gone out after his closing shift the night before and crashed at one of our friends' house. I was so terrified that I literally grabbed my car keys and ran out of the house in my pajamas and drove to my college campus. I sat in the library all day until my roommate got home. He was in shock that something else had happened. From then on, we started sleeping downstairs in the living room, and neither one of us would be there alone. Hoping to get some answers, we approached the landlord and asked if any other tenants had experienced activity like we were experiencing. She was very short in her replies and wouldn't give a direct answer. Next, we contacted the Kentucky Ghost Hunter Society for help. We only told them We had been having activity, and they sent paranormal investigators and a medium. As soon as the medium walked up the stairs towards my bedroom, they stopped and said, "There is a dark figure standing in the door of that room. It is not a good spirit." I left at that point due to the feeling overwhelmed by what was happening. The medium also detected the spirit of a child around the age of 5 and the spirit of a man who was not a threatening entity, but just walked circles around my roommate's room. They said if we were to experience mischievous things, such as items falling over and things moving, it was most likely the spirit of the child. My roommate and I looked at each other and then told the medium about the items on the bookshelf. The entity focused in my bedroom was the one they were most concerned about, and they communicated they feared it may be demonic and didn't want to leave. Naturally, I opted to move out shortly after. In the process of packing, I turned to set a box in the hallway, and as I did, I stepped into a misty white cloud that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was like someone clapped chalkboard erasers together. I didn't feel threatened by it, just confused as to what I had just walked into. On my last day in the apartment, my mom came over to help me clean. When it started to get late, she told me to go back to their house since I had a test in the morning, and that she would finish mopping the stairs. It wasn't long after I got home that she came home. I remember her face was pale and she looked scared. When I asked what was wrong, she said she had been mopping the stairs and heard someone pacing back and forth in the bedroom above her. Knowing my roommate had already moved out and she was the only one there, she left as quickly as she could. I remember her telling me, "I don't know how you lived there." To this day, I don't know how I did either. Though 12 years have passed, I still get the chills when I talk about the experiences I had in that apartment. Story 5. I live on the outskirts of the small historic town of Vine Grove. It's a residential area well off the beaten path, surrounded by forest and close to Otter Creek. I lived here for 9 years with my chocolate lab bull mastiff mix named Harley. He had to be put down last year because he was deaf, almost blind, and was starting to get down in his hips. He was my best friend and it broke my heart to lose him. I haven't had any experiences with the paranormal since I was a little kid, living on a haunted farm with my mother and 3 siblings. But that is another story for another time. On November of 2012, the night it began, I was living alone with just Harley for company. He was sleeping across from me in his doggy bed next to the TV. I was laid back on my couch watching a late movie I'd been wanting to see. It was a little after midnight, and I noticed Harley was getting restless. He began to whimper and pace around the room. On his second lap, he stopped right by the door, staring down the hallway. I didn't think much of it at first, because he had already been out to do his business. I went back to my show, but after 4 or 5 minutes had passed, I noticed he still hadn't moved. I asked him if he saw a mouse or something, but he still did not avert his gaze. I started to feel uneasy, like we weren't alone in the house. I slowly got up and walked over behind Harley. I peered down the hallway to the open door of the bedroom on the very end, but it was pitch black. I stood there for a few minutes so my eyes would adjust. Then I heard this low guttural growl coming from Harley, the kind when you know a dog is serious and about to bite. I looked down at him and his hackles were raised. This made my apprehension even worse. I looked back down the hallway and for an instant I thought I saw a dark shadow figure move from the doorway. I thought, oh crap, there is someone in the house. I went to step past Harley to turn on the hall light, but he blocked me and pushed me and made me step back. He was determined to keep himself between me and whatever he was seeing or sensing. Then, just like that, it was over. Harley whimpered once more and went back and laid down. I tried to get back into my movie, but to no avail. I knew if I didn't go and check it out, I'd never rest that evening. So I got back up, pulled my bat out from behind the couch, turned on the hall light, and marched down the hall to the bedroom. I didn't waste any time. I quickly reached my hand in and flipped on the light. Cautiously, I stepped in. To my surprise, I could find nothing amiss. I checked the window and it was locked. I began to think my eyes had played tricks on me. I started to leave, but I began to hear this eerie music from somewhere in the room. I walked to the middle of the room and sure enough, it was coming out of the floor vent. I thought, what in the hell? I walked to the doorway and could hear talking on the TV. I had nothing else on in the house. I walked back to the vent and it stopped abruptly. Then I heard the scraping coming from the closet, along with a familiar popping noise like dunk, dunk, dunk. It only took me a second before I realized what it was, and it instantly sent a shiver down my spine, and I immediately broke out in goosebumps. My mom had given me this 2-foot angel. It gave me the creeps because it held a candle, which was a clear Christmas bulb, under its chin, so the face was distorted by shadows. Exactly like when a person holds a flashlight under their chin to look scary. When it was plugged in, the arm holding the light moved back to its side and up, catching the wings, and it made a grinding, popping sound, like plastic grinding on plastic joints. And when the wings moved, it made a donk, donk, donk sound. The only thought I had at that moment was, oh my God, this damn thing is moving in the closet without power. I began to break out in a sweat. Part of me wanted to walk over and yank the door open, but my inner voice said, leave this room now. So I backed up out of the room and closed the door. I didn't even turn the light out. The next day I called my mom and she came to visit. I told her what happened, and when I did, she agreed we should get rid of it. I'm not sure, but I think it ended up at Goodwill. It was quiet for about a week or so, and then I met Nikki. I dated this girl off and on for 3 years, and quite a bit happened, so instead of trying to write it all down in one big story, I'm going to write it down in sections as the incidences occur. Thanks for your time. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. I would like to take a moment to point out that a majority of my viewers are not subscribed. If you could be so kind as to subscribe, click like, leave a comment, maybe even share the video, it will go a long way in helping me get recommended. And if you would like to join my Patreon, you'll find a link in the description below. For $5 a month, you'll have access to all my content before it goes to YouTube. That goes for stories and my newest edition, short episodes of my mini haunting series. Now, let's get back to the stories. Story 1. Moundsville, West Virginia. Back in the first week of December 2021, I stopped at my ex-wife Lefty's house before heading home to Pennsylvania. She answered the door, then turned and went 3 or 4 steps up and sat down on the stairs leading upstairs. Entering the house, stairs on the right, a little dining-like room to the immediate left with a small kind of hallway leading to the kitchen in the back, with a TV room in between. In the TV room and said hallway is a door that leads to the basement. This hallway runs through the middle of the house. My back was to the front door, talking with her for roughly 5 minutes, when a shadow came from the TV kitchen area, swung a left and shot upstairs, avoiding hitting her on the steps. Now her and I have a 36-year friendship. We are divorced, yes, but have 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren together. We have had a handful of experiences in different homes we lived in, but this one was way different. I stepped back after the shadow darted upstairs and asked her, "Did you not just see that?" She said, "What, the shadow?" I said, "Yes, the shadow." She then says, "Good, I'm not losing my mind. Someone else sees it too." As I'm asking her how long this activity has been going on, off to my left in the front room, in the corner diagonal from the front inside corner nearest me, a shadow has started to form in the corner. I step forward towards the kitchen in the hallway, spin around with my back now towards the kitchen in a little room now on my right. Using the front window reflection, I tried to see this mass that was growing in the corner, not realizing at the time the reason I couldn't see anything was that the thing in the corner was taking the light out of the room. I leaned forward looking to the right and could not see the white walls in the corner behind the mass. It was extremely dark and made me very uncomfortable. Not many things scares, intimidates, or makes me uncomfortable in this life. This thing did all 3 fast. I asked her, does she feel the cold coming from that room? She just kind of said, yeah, it's always cold, and walks upstairs for a minute, leaving me in the foyer. I stepped forward towards the front door, turned and put my back against the door, looking into the room. Still dark, but getting lighter by the second. I asked what the F are you? and why are you here in the room, and got a bone-chilling cold draft hit me in the face. Then listened to the stairs as if something was walking up them. She comes down a minute or two later and heads into the kitchen. We are having some coffee, and you can hear something moving upstairs. I asked again, how long has this been going on at this level? This is intense. She says a couple years now. I've been gone working in Arizona, Florida, Louisiana, East Texas, and now I'm back up around our daughters. They be in West Virginia, me in Pennsylvania. I was shocked. I said, a couple of years. She said, yeah, but it has picked up over the last 6 months or so. I've been back to that house probably 15 times since then. Have not felt anything like that day. Side note, she's getting divorced and has been moving back into her house in Glendale, a little town next to Moundsville. Whatever that thing was, or is, has attached itself or part of itself to me, or at least that's what I think has happened. Abnormal things have been going on with me and around me. Co-workers watched it and can't explain what's going on. They watched me struggle with something and not understand why it gave me such a fright. Things moved right after I set it down. Been different for sure. So, yeah, that's one of my more recent encounters. At least with a solid black mass, it was kind of creepy how easygoing my ex was about it. Glad someone else had seen it, but was not really interested into why it was happening. Story 2. I've been reading other people's stories since I was around 12, and I finally decided to post a few of my own. I guess I should start with some introductions. You can call me Allie, although that's not my real name. I'm an empath, and I've had a lot of supernatural experiences, some of which I don't understand, as is the case with the one I'm about to share. I thought I should start with this one because A, I'm still confused, and B, it's the least personal. So this all started around 2013. At first I wasn't concerned because I'm very used to seeing shadow people, and that's all it looked like. Every night, as soon as I got in bed, it was there, standing in my doorway, watching me. It stood around 6 feet tall. It was darker than the darkest thing I've ever seen, if that makes sense. He didn't have a face, at least as far as I could tell, but somehow his expression felt angry. He didn't move much, except for occasionally stepping forward or back, and I may have been imagining things, but it looked like he was breathing. It made me uncomfortable, so I tried closing the door, even though it gets extremely hot in my room with the door closed. But when I turned around, he had moved across the room to stand in the corner by my closet, so I gave up and let him be. This went on for about a year, when I noticed things starting to change. For one thing, he moved more, a lot more. He would stand at his usual post for a while, and then he would walk closer until he was at the foot of my bed. Sometimes he would even put his hands on my bed, which, needless to say, nearly made me jump out of my bed. I would roll over to avoid looking at him. He would immediately run across the room and stand by the closet. Another thing that changed was this intense feeling of dread. It felt as if I was a mouse and he was a cat playing with his food. I couldn't sleep. It got to the point where I was paranoid during the day. Whether that was caused by him or the lack of sleep, I'm not sure. It was driving me crazy, and I wanted to know why. So I called my best friend over for a sleepover, let's call her Anne, and made a Ouija board. Yes, I know, I would be the first person to die in a horror movie. We decided to use her necklace as a planchette. Note, this necklace was heavy and flat, so there's no way for it to roll or lift up on its own. And we both held on to the end of the chain, leaving enough slack so as not to accidentally move it ourselves. 10, maybe 15 minutes of asking questions and nothing happened. I began to think maybe I was just being stupid and it really was just another shadow person. We gave up after another 5 minutes and let go of the chain. Not a minute later, after it began to fall off the stool we had placed the board on, but instead of hitting the ground, it slid itself back onto the board and started to spin. After what felt like hours, probably just a minute, of stunned silence, I couldn't think of anything to say but a joking, "Probably just the wind, haha." Anne wouldn't pick it up again after that, but I was determined to get an explanation from this thing if it killed me. It refused to speak coherently with the Ouija board, or maybe it couldn't, only saying a few random words including hex, stew, and toenail. Trying to think of ways those words could be put together in a sentence may just be more disturbing than the actual experience. But anyway, since I couldn't get it to work with the Ouija board, even when I put my hand on the pendant instead of the chain, I decided to try something like automatic writing instead. I turned off autocorrect and put the board over the keyboard of my computer, making one yes and equal sign no. Then I closed my eyes, tied the chain around my hand without the pendant, and asked what he wanted. Whichever way I felt the end of the chain swing, I followed and typed a letter. Anne was watching curiously from the other side of the room, but not daring to come closer. When I opened my eyes, however, she asked what had been typed, and I told her it would be better if she read it herself, mostly because I didn't want to read it out loud. It flirted with her, calling her words I'd rather not repeat on here. It used her name. Angry, I asked it what it wanted from me. It responded by cussing me out and telling me to give the board to Anne. I compromised by asking her to read while I typed. I again closed my eyes and started typing, but promptly opened them when I heard my friend gasp. I read what was said, and my mouth fell open. He had threatened to decapitate her crush, by name, with a rusty fork. We had not talked about him once since she had been over, nor had his name ever been typed on that computer. Now thoroughly disturbed, I decided to ask one more question before saying goodbye. What is your name? He answered immediately. Griffin Goodbaden. This answer was dripping with so much sarcasm I couldn't feel it. Griffin was the name of an imaginary foe I made up when I was little. He was cartoonish, 1-foot-tall hunter that I would pretend had captured my stuffed animals and have my other toys rescue. But I decided not to push any further and said goodbye. Strange things happened for the next couple days, but he no longer stood by my bed at night. Anne said she saw a skull in the mirror that night when we went to bed. I looked and I did see a faint glowing spot, but not the skull. The next day after she left, a different necklace flew off my dresser and nearly hit me in the head. My closet door slammed on my leg. I finally learned a few cleansing rituals and used them. I even did an exorcism for good measure. Haven't really had any problems with him since, but the question still stands. Who or what is he? Was he a demon? Poltergeist? My house is new, but it is on top of an abandoned coal mine. Please tell me what you think. Story 3. I spent a good amount of my childhood living with my grandparents in a very rural part of West Virginia. Their house, well, the whole area where they lived, was haunted. There were many times that we'd hear footsteps in a room nobody was in at the time, paper towel rolls unraveling themselves, things that you normally associate with some place that's haunted. But honestly, especially when you're very young, you really don't think about it too much. It's just the way things are. But one night, at least for me, that all changed. I was probably about 6 or 7 at the time of this incident. My grandma had some relatives visiting, and I really never liked them. They were loud, obnoxious, and generally unpleasant to be around. I was a quiet kid and had decided that I needed to get away from all the ruckus going on in the living room, where my grandparents, my brothers, and their boorish relatives were talking. So I left the living room and walked into the kitchen. Let me explain the layout of the house briefly. My grandparents bought a 2-room house from my grandma's brother and added on as needed, so the layout wasn't what you'd call a traditional one. When you walked out of the living room, you entered the kitchen, which had a bedroom attached to it, and a door leading out to a small utility room used for storage. This room emptied out into the yard, where a small creek babbled away. There were other rooms, but for time's sake I won't describe them. Anyway, I was going through the kitchen to the aforementioned bedroom. That's where my toys were. When I walked in, the first thing to draw my attention was the huge crystal cake plate sitting in the middle of my grandparents' big kitchen table. My grandma was quite the cook, and they had made this cake from scratch, and it was a beaut. Because of the fact that I was so young, the cake plate was so massive, and the table was so big, there was no way for me to move it. As I entered the room, suddenly the cake plate, without anyone touching it, picked itself up and hurled itself across the room. I stood there with a mixture of fear and awe. When my grandma came running in along with pretty much everybody else in the living room, she screamed, "Why? Why did you do that? I worked so hard to make that cake. Why did you throw it like that?" My grandpa walked in, looked at her, and said, "You know that boy didn't do that, and you know what did." I'll never forget the look of fear and sadness on her face, or how her face completely drained of color. I know it doesn't sound like much, but that was the day I woke up to the fact that there are things in that house that weren't of this world. I started noticing, really noticing what was going on. There are a lot more things about the house I could talk about, and hopefully this will give me a chance to by writing my stories. I started with this one because of how it woke me up with the strangest of things going on there. Story 4. I know what I want to say, just hard finding the words, so please bear with me if I ramble. But my mom's sister and brother and I just lost Dad on September 4th and was buried September 7th, Labor Day. He died of pneumonia. He died in West Virginia Veteran Hospital. He's buried in a private cemetery in Browntown, West Virginia. 1 month after his death, my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 esophagus cancer that done spread to the liver and lungs. She had radiation and is now going through chemo. On one of her good days, she decided she was going to make the bed herself before my sister arrived to help her. She lives next trailer over. She's lost so much weight. 130 pounds is down to 78 pounds when she's 4 foot 9 inches. That when she flicked the blanket as best as she could, and off her wedding band came and she heard it go into the vent. So upset, she looked for tools to lift the vent, but my sister took all the tools out of the home just because my mom is hard-headed and will climb a ladder to fix something, and we don't want her hurt. She had a stroke in April 2015 and a heart attack in June 2015, and now walks with a cane, and she's diabetic. Last thing we need is her to fall. When Dad was around, he was 6 foot 6 inches, about 220 pounds, reached all the high stuff and was a mechanic before his heart attack in '99. Mom was so upset that when my sister did get there, she rushed to the kitchen to tell her all about it, and just stopped and went dead silent, and tears flooded her eyes. My sister didn't understand. As Mom reached past her and over the kitchen table, in the ashtray there laid Mom's wedding band. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. Almost a year ago, I woke from a strange dream. I dreamt that my partner's dresser was missing from our bedroom and I was staring at an empty space. I awoke with a very uncomfortable feeling and tried my best to rationalize the dream as being more related to the fact that we had a new bedroom furniture on layaway at a local store and the dresser would soon be going. Still though, something didn't feel right. In the past, I've had dreams before pets have passed away. Usually I dream something of theirs is missing, a pet bed, a cage, etc., and I get a very foreboding feeling. This was the first time I'd ever had this happen where it involved a person. Last Memorial Day weekend, May 28, 2022 to be precise, my partner was accidentally killed when his gun fired just as we were turning in for the night. It was a tragic accident, and to this day I don't understand how this could happen. I really feel that the dream I had earlier was a premonition of what was to come, although I could hardly guess it would be the harbinger of something so tragic. The bullet missed me, and to this day I don't know how I am still here. As part of my healing, I stayed up in a northern Arizona town on weekends where I'd journal, rest, cry, and just relax. Over this past Thanksgiving weekend, I decided to read back in the journal I had kept since the accident. I have journaled since I was 12 years old and have always loved the aspect that we can track our progress and growth by simply reading back. I got into bed with my notebook and started to read. As I reached more current times, my eyes started to close and the notebook would fall towards my face, jerking me back awake. After a few times of this happening, I set the notebook down and started to drift off. Somewhere in between that still awake and almost asleep state, I heard my partner's voice as if he were talking right into my ear. His voice was unmistakable. He told me he was so proud of me. I could hear the intonations of his words. I immediately sat up in bed and said out loud, "I heard you, I heard you." He could clearly see what I was doing. He had to have known I was reading back on my journey through grieving his loss. It gives me hope that our loved ones are still with us. A lot of my friends have had signs, so I was happy that it was finally my turn. Months later, I can still replay this back in my mind. I memorized all of it, every syllable. I haven't had much more happen that night. I've asked for a few signs here and there, and he always comes through. On occasion, I will smell pipe smoke in the house when no one has been smoking. Thanks for reading. Story 2. Early 2015, I was working in a small rural hospital. The hospital had a wing for regular patients and a wing for prisoners, who would be brought in from the prison that was located in the town. The hospital prison wing would only be open and used if there were 5 or more prisoners admitted. This way, the non-prisoner wing would not fill up with prisoners, making the other patients and their families uncomfortable. I worked the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and because this hospital was small and rural, there was not any family or people walking around the hospital during the night, as you may see in a larger, busier hospital. Anyways, a lab was located in the hospital that blood samples and the like were taken to. If I had time during my shifts, I would run stuff to the lab during downtime to help out our CNAs. There have been times that I had to run to the prisoner wing alone to get some supplies or meds, and the first few times I did, I was super creeped out. There's something about the air and the feel in there that would freak me out. I got the feeling like I was being watched. I would hurry so I could get in and get the hell out ASAP. After the first few times of going in there alone, I always made someone come with me. One night while walking to the lab alone, I passed the prisoner wing entrance, which was dark and empty. You could always feel a creepy feeling in and near there. No big deal, just walk fast and get past it quickly. So, on my way back to my unit from the lab, again, I passed by the entrance to the prisoner ring. This time, as I passed it, I heard someone whistling a tune in there. I slowed down and did a quick 2-second peek in through the opening. It was dark and empty, no staff in there. Who would be in there, in the dark, and whistling? I know who. No one. So I quickly ran back to my unit and told a couple of my coworkers, who believed me but hadn't experienced anything themselves there. Fast forward a couple of months, it was during the summertime, when our patient load is decreased significantly to mostly just locals. Our unit has 20 beds, but this night we had only less than half of that many patients. The unit has only one way in and one way out for patients. When you walk into the unit, which has an oval-shaped floor plan, the nurse's station is directly in front of you, and you have patient's room on your right and left sides. Each side is a hallway with 10 rooms going down it, and there is another nurse's station in the back. Each room has a glass front, like an ICU room, so you can see inside the room if the curtain is open. Empty rooms have the curtains open, and most occupied patients' rooms have them closed for patient privacy. This night, the patients were placed in the rooms towards the front of the unit, where the entrance is. Most of the staff, the nurses and CNAs, stayed at the nurses' station in the front. One of my CNAs, who was assigned to my patients, ended up sitting in the back nurse's station because she needed a computer to chart on. I went to the back where she was sitting, and I was standing on the outside of the counter so I could face her directly and speak to her while she sat sitting in front of me. As I'm standing there talking to her, I'm looking over her head at the empty patients' rooms behind her. As I'm talking to her, I had to stop, and I'm pretty sure I stopped mid-sentence, and my mouth stayed open. I saw a man with a patient gown on walk from one side of an empty room to the other. I saw him, full apparition, go from one end to the other. I knew that those rooms were all empty. A CNA, watching my face, started loudly saying, What's going on?" And she jumped up thinking that someone was behind her. I told her, not so calmly, that I saw a man in room 113. I went to tell the other nurses. They checked to see if a patient had died in that room, and no one had. The beds in all the rooms are ICU beds, and used for ICU and non-ICU patients, and we wondered if the bed was once then maybe a patient had died on. There was no way to check. This was the topic of the night, since it amped us all up. A few hours later, the little old house cleaning lady came into the unit to clean some stuff and overheard us talking about the apparition I saw. She wanted to share her story and started telling us what she experienced when she cleans the prison wing. She told us that when she cleans in the prison wing by herself, she'll hear someone whistling in there. I was like, holy crap, I heard the whistling coming from there a few months ago. This totally validated my experience. When I first started, there was one particular room that was up by the front nurse's station that would catch my eye. There were times that I would be charting at one of the computers that faced that room, or walked by the room, and out of the corner of my eye, I would see what looked like a man standing at the doorway. When I would look, it would be gone. You could just see it, like out of the corner of your eye. I told one of the nurses who had worked there for a while, and she told me that a male patient had recently passed away in that room. Story 3. I was 6 years old. My older sister was 9. The year was 1982. My mom and dad went out somewhere that night and got us a babysitter. We lived in a very small 2-story, 2-bedroom apartment with one bathroom that was upstairs. Our babysitter was a teenage girl who lived 2 doors down. The babysitter was keeping us occupied, and I remember we were all coloring at the table. I had to go to the bathroom really bad, but I was scared to go upstairs alone. I don't remember ever being scared in that house before this day. I asked my sister if she would come with me to the bathroom. She said no because she was coloring. I kept asking her, almost begging her if she would come with me, but she kept saying no. Finally, the babysitter got sick of me asking, yelled at me, and told me to go to the bathroom by myself because my sister did not want to go. I remember being so scared as I walked up those stairs alone. Before I knew it, I was standing on top of the landing. The small hallway was dark, and so was the bathroom. I stood there on the landing, tilting my head in front of the doorway. The only part of my body entering the bathroom was my tiny hand to flip on the light switch, and as I stepped in the last stair into the hallway. The lights were those horrible fluorescent tubes lights that flickered for moments before coming all the way on. As I flipped up the light switch, the lights dimly turned on, flickering. At that moment, in the dim light, I saw it. The devil was sitting on the rim of the bathtub. It was what you would almost picture in your mind as a stereotypical looking devil. It was red, had horns, and a tail. It sat there on the rim of the bathtub, motionless, silent. We locked eyes for what seemed like an eternity. I was petrified, and I physically couldn't move. The lights seemed to stay flickering a lot longer than what they normally would. Finally, when the lights came all the way on and fully illuminated the bathroom, the devil was gone. I must have ran back down the stairs right after that, but I was so scared I don't remember. My sister says she remembers me running downstairs yelling, "The devil's in the bathroom." She said she remembers running upstairs to the bathroom and moving the shower curtain around to see if anything was in the bathtub. The next thing I remember was my mom walking into the house and me running to her, telling her the devil was in the bathroom. But she didn't take me seriously, so I ran outside to my dad. He picked me up and held me in his arms, and I told him I saw the devil in the bathroom. I remember him saying to me, "I believe you." That was the very first paranormal experience I had that I can remember. It was several years later before I had my next experience with the paranormal. Story 4. Had an experience I figured was worth sharing as it left me a little spooked and perplexed. I was recently out in Tucson for a music festival with my close friend. We drove out from Colorado and unfortunately did so at night, both ways, so didn't get to enjoy the beautiful scenery along the way, but it made for easy driving. After the festival was over, we drove out to Mesa to see our friend from high school, said our goodbyes as we prepared for the 12-hour drive home. We left just after sunset, and about 3 hours into the drive on a mountain pass, give or take around midnight, we were singing along to an old 90s tune, early 2000 pop hits, and cracking jokes and laughing so hard we had tears streaming down our faces. The moon wasn't full and we were surrounded by trees, so it was really dark. As we hit a straight stretch of road on the pass, I could only see in front of the car as far as the headlights allowed, and nothing behind us. There was nobody else on this road for miles but us, and I was suddenly hit with a weird feeling of uneasiness. I had been checking my rearview mirror pretty often as we were loaded down with camping gear, and I wanted to allow faster cars to pass us, but at this point we hadn't seen anyone for nearly 30 minutes. I glanced in the mirror to the black void behind us and back ahead, and after a few seconds I saw a light out of the peripheral vision, and I looked up again. It was a small, dark sedan tailgating us, and really riding us close. Their driver side headlight was out, and the other one was really yellow and dim. I watched as they sped up and got right on my bumper. I mean, like less than 10 feet, where it was uncomfortably close. I looked at my friend and laughed and pointed back with my thumb and said, "Check this a-hole out. There's plenty of room to pass us." And we both checked. The car was gone. Just the same darkness that had been there before and blur of tree silhouettes. I told him what I had seen and described the car. He got goosebumps and said he had been feeling uneasy on that stretch of pass too. Nothing else notable happened the rest of the drive, but it left a weird feeling in my gut until we made it into the next town. I've heard similar stories of ghost cars over the years, but never seen it for myself until then. I wouldn't consider it to have been necessarily scary, but it definitely left me perplexed as to have no explanation for what happened, and I'm curious as to the history of that stretch of road, if there were any fatal accidents, etc. Can't remember exactly the name of the pass nor the road we were on, but at some point I'd like to look it up and see if there's any articles about that pass. Story 5. We went to stay the night at my mother's house. My husband and my 4 young children were already asleep on the pallet we made on the living room floor. I was still laying there trying to fall asleep. Down the hallway, I see what looks like a bubble in the shape of a woman. She is slowly moving down the hallway towards the living room. At first, I think I'm just seeing things and just need to get some sleep. But she keeps getting closer and closer. As she enters the living room, I start getting scared and start shaking my husband to wake up. My 6-month-old baby girl is laying next to us on her back with one of her legs bent. The closer this bubble lady came to us, the harder I'm shaking my husband. I yell his name, and right as he jumps awake, my daughter starts getting dragged across the living room floor by her leg. My husband jumps up and grabs her right before she gets to the hallway. We just sat there for the rest of the night, wide awake, holding our children tightly in our arms. That house has always had a thickness in the air and paranormal things happening. My 3-year-old daughter used to wake up in the middle of the night and start playing with her friends. We would hear her talking to someone and then see her run by on the baby monitor, then see 3 little shadows running after her on the wall. She even told us that her friends were dead and they would tell her to go with them. We asked her where they go, and she went to the back bedroom and pointed in the closet and said, "They go in there." Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. I'm going to tell you guys a story that happened to me in Maryland, 2011. My wife and I rented a house in Waldorf, Maryland. I never felt right in that house. When I looked at it from the outside, it looked a little dark, even during the early afternoon. The house had wooden floors throughout the living room and kitchen. Whenever I would watch TV by myself downstairs, I always heard little footsteps behind me. When I turned around to see who or what it is, they stopped. When I would be by myself in the house upstairs, I always felt someone watching me. When I got halfway down the stairs, the feeling would stop. My teenage daughter would tell me all the time, "Dad, I think we have a ghost in here in the house." My wife didn't believe us. One day I was upset with the ghost, and I heard footsteps go to the edge of the living room. So I went to where I heard the steps, and I said, "Show yourself, I know you are there." The footsteps then went away from me and walked over to the other side of the living room. Again I said, "Show yourself." Nothing happened, nothing appeared. We lived in this house for 2 years, and I never saw anything, but I for sure heard things and felt things. I was always on guard at that house. I never could relax either. I read on the internet that a 5-year-old girl got shot to death by a stray bullet at our house years earlier, like 99 I think. We had a little playground thing in our backyard too. I think maybe she is the ghost at our house. Please tell me what you guys think. Story 2. I'm not sure if this counts as a lucid dream or a real encounter with a spirit, but it has been bugging me ever since it happened, and I'd like to share it with other people who might have had similar experience. I laid down for a quick nap while my boyfriend played video games a few feet away from me. As soon as I closed my eyes, I immediately went off into an identical version of my apartment. I was completely comfortable and didn't think twice of how I got there. I walked down my hallway into the bathroom and tried to turn on the light, but the light wasn't working. I backed up a little into the hallway and saw an older woman with short grayish hair right outside the bathroom, looking directly at me. She was pretty close to me and hesitantly smiling at me. Not to sound cliche, but she was almost slightly see-through, as if she was a spirit. An overwhelming feeling came over me. My body felt light, but there was a huge weight in my chest, and I wasn't sure if it was fear or happiness that I had possibly encountered someone from the other side. I looked over her shoulder and realized my boyfriend was still in the other room, and that gave me some comfort while I decided if she was harmless or malevolent. I smiled back at her and we stood there for a moment. Whatever I was feeling got very intense and emotional, and I snapped up back in my bed. One of the reasons this has been bugging me so much is that usually when I dream, or have a lucid dream, my surroundings are altered a bit differently than the surroundings in my reality. But this is the first time the location I was at was completely identical. It was the exact same setting I was just in, with my boyfriend playing video games and everything. Also, the feeling that overwhelmed me was nothing like I've felt before. I've been in this apartment complex for over a year and never experienced anything like this. Ever since this has happened, I've been struggling to sleep. I have this feeling that someone is in the hallway watching me at night. Was I simply just having an intense lucid dream, or was the lady I saw an actual spirit? I get goosebumps every time I think about the whole thing. Story 3. April 20th, 2016, my 9th grade year. I had taken the train from Frederick, Maryland with my entire German 1 class to Union Station in Washington, D.C. My German teacher had this tradition where every other year in April, she'd take her German classes to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I just happened to be part of that trip. When we arrived at Union Station, we broke up into groups of 5. We were to go get some food, go to the restroom, then meet up with everyone else in the middle of the station. After all of us returned to Frau, we walked to a bus stop that would take us from Union Station all the way to the Holocaust Museum. When we arrived at the entrance to the museum, I chose 4 other kids to be in my group. I only remember the name of one group member, Jason, so after getting our bags checked, we entered the museum. We then had to sit through a 25-minute lecture, which was normal for the museum. After the lecture, Frau let us go with the groups to explore the museum. Once my group got to the first exhibit, I didn't feel right, so I took out my rosary and started to pray for protection. But after 2 minutes of me silently praying, Jason cut me off. He's a hardcore atheist. This is what he said: "Stop praying, you're hurting me." I stopped praying like he said and put my rosary back in my purse. I didn't get to finish praying. Now this is where things took a turn. My group began walking around the museum, checking out every exhibit. Everyone in my group were acting normal, but also respectful. But for me, this wasn't the case. As we were walking, I began to feel lightheaded. I brushed it off as being me not taking an Advil before the train ride, so I kept walking. But as we got deeper into the museum, I was still feeling lightheaded, and it was slowly getting worse. The entire left side of my back felt like it was on fire. I squinted a little at the feelings. We continued on, and my condition wasn't getting any better. The deeper we were in the museum, the worse my pain got. Soon we were near a bridge made of glass, and on the other side of the bridge, there were long glass panels, and on the other side of the panels were real shoes with real dried blood from the Jews. I was walking slowly across the bridge. I was still lightheaded. The left side of my body still felt like it was on fire, and now another feeling was added. Near my lower back, it felt like someone was kicking it with a metal tip on their boot. But it wasn't just a small kick. No, it was a harsh kick that really hurt. After we crossed the glass bridge, I walked past a glass container that had the Nazi flag in it. I stopped for a second and looked at the container. Then I saw someone who looked transparent. He obviously wasn't from this time period, and he also looked way too old to be part of my group. The semi-transparent man looked to be covered in blood and soot. His clothes were torn, and he had a black eye. I felt my pain grow stronger. Jason noticed that I was staring at the glass and not moving. He called out to me, and I snapped back to reality. I walked over to him, and he led me back to the group. At this point, we were almost out of the darkest parts of the museum. The pain I was feeling was so bad, I felt like I was going to pass out. I just couldn't take it anymore. Dry tear stains were on my cheeks because I was silently crying, but I pressed on so I could get to the last part of the museum and be done with this. My group entered a place in the museum called the Hall of Remembrance. The moment I stepped into that hall, all the pain I was feeling somehow disappeared like it was never there to begin with. For the rest of my time in D.C., I was happy and laughing. When the train brought us back to Frederick, I found my dad and walked with him to his car. As we were heading home, I told him about everything that happened to me in that museum. He seemed shocked, but then said to me that it was probably Jesus showing me what the Jews felt during the Holocaust, and I was feeling the pain that they felt. I am now 18 years old, and I've graduated from my high school. This is an experience that I'll never forget. And about that bloody man I saw in the museum, that was almost definitely an apparition. I believe in ghosts. I'm not a skeptic at all. I also believe what my dad told me on the way back to the train station was true. Ever since then, I've never had any other experiences like that. That one will stay with me until the day I die. Story 4. This happened around 2009 when my family moved into this old house that was built in the 60s. It was a 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, 2 on the second floor where my room is, and my little brother is also. The master's bedroom is on the first floor, and another room for my older brother. It has a basement as well, which we rarely go unless necessary. It is always cold down in the basement, even in summer, and I always felt like there's someone downstairs with us that we don't see. I've always been sensitive to the energies around me. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like tingling sensations you experience at the back of your head, or sometimes on my arms, depending on where that energy is concentrated from. With that sensation, I kind of feel some sort of weird emotions. That's why it's easy for me to tell if, like, I'm entering a house or a place I get overwhelmed with strong emotions or sadness or hate. I don't know, it just comes natural to me. Now, whenever I go to this basement of ours, I always felt like I get overwhelmed with sadness, like you want to cry but couldn't. I shrugged it off as possibly my weird imagination, or maybe I was just that sad at the time, even though I don't have a reason to be. So a few nights living in that house, something happened that kind of freaked me out. My room was on the second floor. I remember that night I was sound asleep, and then there was this overwhelming presence in my room that makes me think I wasn't alone. I woke up because I felt so uneasy, like someone was trying to wake me up by just staring at me. I know it's weird, but it's hard to explain. I just woke up because I felt like I was being stared at with intense gaze. That's the best I could describe it. My room was dark, with slightly dim light from my window, coming from the streetlights outside. When I was fully conscious, I immediately looked at the middle of my room, and I saw this African American guy in a soldier's uniform. The uniform looks neat. There's no blood on it whatsoever. It's the same one you guys see on TV when military guys go formal attire. It was like that. It was green in color, neatly pressed with some medals or something on his chest, I don't know. Now by that time, I knew already that I was seeing is not a live person, because how the heck will a military person stand in front of me in the middle of my room where no one even broke into our house? He was just standing there looking at me. It was unnerving, but he seemed like he wasn't bad. He was just there, staring. So before I get even more scared, I offered a little prayer in mind. I was like saying, can you go now? I'm kind of scared. And I prayed the Lord's Prayer. After a few moments of that, he just disappeared, vanished into thin air. And that feeling I got, like the sadness and heavy emotions, it was also gone. After that night, I never felt anything odd in that house anymore. We lived there for almost 6 years. By the way, my older brother, who is a deaf mute, told me in sign language that he always sees a soldier coming out of a huge tree in our backyard. I don't know if that is the same person I saw, but it shocked me because he described it as a soldier also. Story 5. I have this cross necklace that I wore since my high school days. I started wearing this necklace when something happened to me every night at exactly 3 a.m., where I will wake up for no particular reason at all, and I get kind of a feeling of being watched. It happened for 3 consecutive days, and on the third day I had a very bad dream. It was about Jesus Christ, but his face changed into something sinister and scary. That got me scared so much I couldn't sleep well for days. To tell you the truth, those experiences may or may not be related when my friends and I practiced witchcraft at a nearby seashore. We have this public place with a hotel and restaurant place that is near the seas. Some parts of it are somewhat covered with tall grass and trees, away from the main hotel itself. This is in the Philippines. Now, ever since that time we played around with the witchcraft, I had these feelings of overwhelming negative energy all the time around me. I am sensitive to energies, especially emotions and just the feeling of it. So that's the reason I got this cross necklace, which was blessed and given to me by a friend. This cross necklace of mine is weird, but it did help me feel secured and protected somehow. I have this mantra, or I keep praying inside my mind, that this cross necklace will stay with me to protect me from something bad always. But if I ever am not worthy of it, like if I did something horrible, I will lose this necklace. I don't know if that mindset of mine made a difference, but for the next few years, I noticed that if I lose that necklace somewhere, it would always come back to me. For example, one time I was driving my mom off to her work to the hospital in Maryland. I knew something was off immediately. Noticed I wasn't wearing my necklace. I really thought I misplaced it somewhere, so when I got back to the house, I checked my room, my bed, everywhere. Nothing. I went outside in our yard just in case maybe it fell on our front lawn, but nothing. I gave up and went back to my room and was shocked. The cross necklace was there on top of my pillow, laying flat in the middle of it like it was neatly placed to be noticed. I didn't mind on how bizarre that it was, because I was happy I got my cross necklace back. Another time I felt the cross necklace fell on our front lawn. It slid down on my chest into the grass. It did really happen, so I bent down and looked for it. You would think that you will find it fast because you knew where it fell, but nope. I searched and searched all over the lawn, and even backtracked my steps just to make sure, and I didn't find it. It was so weird and frustrating because I could have sworn it fell on the spot where I was standing on that lawn. I was disappointed to not find it, but determined to look for it no matter what. It took me about 20 to 30 minutes searching all over the grass when I decided to go back to the house, to my room, and get away from the scorching heat of the sun, when I saw my cross necklace placed on top of my pillow, exactly like the last time I found it when it got lost. That was weird, but I was just happy I found it again. Now this next thing that happened is the weirdest of all. This cross necklace, I gave it to my boyfriend back then, and now my husband back in 2013. I gave it to him because I knew that cross necklace was special, and deep in my heart and mind, it really is magical. I prayed to God that my boyfriend then will always protect me from harm as long as he has that cross necklace with him. I did make a vow that I will only give that necklace to someone special that I know I will spend my whole life with forever. Not to make it cheesy and all, so he has this necklace. I was in Maryland that time. I was either using Skype or some app that I can talk to them from far away. I told him that there's a typhoon coming that will hit our hometown, which means where he lives at the time, in the Philippines. He said yes, he knows about it, and they are staying in and not evacuating, as opposed to what the officials had urged the people to do in that place. My husband's house is situated near the sea, so in about an hour, when the super typhoon struck our hometown, I lost connection to him. I couldn't contact him, nothing at all. 24 hours passed. I got very worried. I remember I was on the computer all the time monitoring the news about the typhoon in our place. There was this one news televised right after the typhoon aftermath, and I distinctly remember it was already early morning, around 5 a.m. on Maryland, when the first news was able to air. I was shocked that the devastation was so severe. They didn't anticipate the storm surge that washed away our hometown. Thousands died, and the place where my husband lives was hit the hardest because he lives near the sea. I remember I cried and I told my mom, I'm going to the Philippines. There were lots of bodies that are not recovered, and although my chances are slim, I prayed to God that he was okay and his family are okay. I remember we went to church first before my flight back to the Philippines. I prayed hard that everyone I knew and love is okay. Now, right about before my flight, I received a SMS message from one of my close friends in the Philippines that was somewhat connected to my husband's family. She said everyone was fine and all right. If only I can describe the feelings I had that time. I was shocked, happy, and grateful to God. Apparently they did stay in their house, but they were able to survive the 6 to 7 feet storm surge when they went to the roof. What was sad was the ones who went to the evacuation centers, especially on the ground level, died, but my husband's family survived by staying in their house. If they went to the evacuation center, something different might have happened. The cross necklace was with my husband, but he said it fell into the waters. I was just glad he was okay. Fast forward to a month when I was in the Philippines with my husband's family in the northern part. We were swimming on the swimming pool, and guess what? We found the necklace on the bottom of the swimming pool. The brother of my husband said he saw it, and it looked familiar as it was my husband's necklace during the typhoon. How weird that we found the same cross necklace 1,000 miles from where it got lost on the waters and debris during the typhoon, and now in the swimming pool. My husband returned back with the necklace to me when we got married in 2014 in Baltimore. We moved to Texas 5 years ago, and when I was stepping out from my work, I felt it fall down my chest and onto the parking lot. I searched and looked for it until I gave up. Until now, that necklace is still missing and I haven't seen it ever again. Something I remember, though, about my necklace is that once I said that if I ever did something bad, I will lose that necklace. I don't know if I did something really horrible, but I just feel and hope that maybe it will show up for me like last time. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. I was about 6 years old when this happened to me. Some things may seem confusing, such as why my parents won't believe me now when one of them was there, but there's a logical explanation that I know that I don't feel comfortable sharing. This is definitely not a dream I had, because I clearly remember waking up with a blue thing wrapped around me. Being young, I didn't and still don't have any idea what it was. Getting up and walking outside to where my grandpa was lighting a fire. I got 7 to 8 splinters in my feet because I didn't have shoes on. I had finished taking a shower and my mom entered the bathroom with a towel. For some reason, I didn't feel like getting out of the shower and just stood there looking at her in a daze. Normally, of course, I would simply get out, she would dry me off and help me dress. This time, however, I just stared at her. All of a sudden, it felt like someone pushed me and I fell forward towards the faucet, which I happened to hit at just the right angle to where it cut my side. I, at first, didn't feel any pain. In fact, I don't remember any pain or blood. I remember looking in the mirror, which was to my left, and seeing a cut in it. Being young, started crying. My mom asked me what was wrong, but I was hysterical and didn't respond. She turned me around and noticed the cut on my side. She proceeded to call my grandpa, who came over and carried me to their house that was 2 yards over. It was a small neighborhood with only our house next to the road, the yard, a tree house, an actual one with people living in it, and my grandparents' house. There was another set of houses across the street too, but those aren't important in the story. I don't remember what happened after that other than me waking up in bed. All I know is that I was pushed by something, and my mom and I were the only ones in the room. I've told my parents the story now, and they don't believe me. I won't elaborate on why they didn't believe me, but I will answer any other questions regarding this. Some details may be distorted or lost with time. I'm not sure about the history of the house. I don't live there anymore. Story 2. If you want to go to any place that is haunted, just go to the small city of Savannah, Georgia. It's teeming with haunted life. You can't escape it when you're there. Every square inch of that city is haunted. It makes sense since it's one of the oldest towns in the United States. The locals would knowingly live side by side with these spirits as if they're residents nonchalantly. I once saw an object move on its own next to a cashier, and he just casually moved it back and said, "Hey, Ghost of Kevin, stop moving my stuff already." The city even thrives off its paranormal attraction with bus and nightly tours. I went to college there as a hard skeptic, to come out as a total believer. Fun fact, my first dorm was formerly a coffin factory. That's how weirdly macabre this little city can be. I had many ghost stories from that city in my 4 years, but I'll tell one of them that still gives me the creeps to this day. One night in my dorm, I woke up around 2 a.m. and I needed to use the bathroom. As I went out across the hall to go, I saw someone out of the corner of my eye coming out of their room and started walking towards the other bathroom on that side. I didn't think much of it and thought it was my dorm mate who just happened to go at the same time. She tends to stay up really late to finish assignments anyhow. I did my business and started to walk back, only to see her walking back like me. I turned to look and wave at her, but stopped dead in my tracks, and so did this person. The girl wasn't my dorm mate. She had red hair, pale features, and she was wearing this large t-shirt that covers her down to her knees. What's extremely eerie was the fact that she stopped at the same time as me when I turned to look at her, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking right towards the room where my dorm mate would be. I started to wonder if the door leading to the bathroom had opened to begin with. I got tense and quickly went into my room to shut the door and lock it. It took me a moment and I decided it was just late night fogs and I imagined it, or it was a friend of hers, a peculiar friend she has. However, my door started to violently shake. Someone was trying to open the door in a hurry. I was startled and I called out to my dorm mate if that was her. No answer. I decided to open the door to see that no one was there. I felt freaked out, of course, but I just wanted to think It was just my mind playing tricks on me, them playing a prank, or I was just fatigued. I eventually went back to sleep, but I was awoken again by something unknown. I felt something wasn't right. I was about to turn my lamp back on until I saw something out of the corner of my eye again, and it was in front of my door in my room. Obviously, I was scared now, and I thought it was a good idea to look right at where I supposedly saw someone, and I did. It was the same girl, staring at me, and she had these terrifyingly sad, pitch black eyes. I yelled in shock and switched on the lamp to find her gone right after. It wasn't long until my doormate in my hall came out and asked if I was okay. I was confident enough to tell her what I saw, but she didn't know what to think. I couldn't go back to sleep that night. Later, I decided to ask my doormate across the hall about what happened. When I described it to her, she immediately froze and she looked a little scared herself. She told me I saw her too. To be honest, I did some research on my own time about any significant hauntings in our dorms. I found a case where a female student committed suicide in my room where I stay in. Sadly, there are cases of students committing suicide notoriously, so every year attending this college. To this day, it makes the hairs from the back of my head stand up just thinking about it, but I do hope that this spirit finds peace. Story 3. Things move around sometimes in a home that has people in it who are experiencing an emotional upheaval. People say that poltergeist activities are usually centered around adolescence. I am turning 39 this year, but that is besides the point. I have an active imagination, and I'm always at the center of some creative whirlwind wherever I go. I was also divorced last year after 10 fruitless years of marriage. Last year was not my best time. I had to move back in with my mom and stepfather. At the time of these goings on, they lived in Hauntings, Georgia. I was upset, but I know that I tried very hard to have a good attitude about having to start my life over again for the 5th time. It wasn't just me that brought the attitude to the house in Hauntings. There was a good amount of it there already. During the time we lived there, every single one of us heard footsteps walking around and a child talking outside the house. My stepfather, Mark, was the first person to hear the child. Mark smoked cigarettes like nobody's business, back and forth on the porch out back, all hours of the day and night. He has a herniated disc in his back, which facilitates the behavior of being awake all night and all day. He reported hearing a child who seemed to be trying to get his attention shortly after midnight. It said, "Mark, Mark, Mark," in an excited whisper. He said that the sound was close by his face, but the floodlights illuminated everything nearby, and there was nothing to be seen at the time. The porch he was sitting on was a concrete square that was attached to the ground. There was no one there but himself. He started smoking on the front porch after that. To be honest, when he said that, I thought, obviously he needs a good night's sleep. I thought this despite the fact that I was hearing footsteps all the time, and my personal items were being moved all over the house. 2 times I had the unique experience of finding all my socks separated from each other in my drawer. I can be scatterbrained, but there's no way that I am the cause of that one. I changed my mind about the child one day when I met a little boy named Colin, who was coasting around aimlessly in our backyard. I got his attention and asked him if he was looking for anything. He said he was looking for a child that lived in my house. I told Colin that no children live in my house or ever have. It was a new house and my parents were the first people to live there. Colin looked confused. He asked if Mark lived there. I said, "Sure, Mark lives here, but he's 67. Who are you looking for?" Colin, still confused, did not answer me and ran off. He came back after about 2 hours and insisted that there was a little boy that lived in my house, and this boy told Colin to come back later to play. He was certain that a child about his own age of 7 or 8 was there, living in my house. He said he saw him that day. Well, this mysterious child in my house was the subject of much speculation, but of course we never got any answers about that. Colin, I found out, lived nearby, but Mark said he had never seen Colin before. It was very startling that Colin asked for Mark. At that time, I thought there was a connection between Colin and whatever was pestering Mark outside while he was smoking. I feel silly about this, but after first meeting Colin, I began to entertain the idea that a ghost child had told Colin about the people he lives with. In reality, it was probably only like this. Colin knew who Mark was, and since I was a dead end for his questioning, he wanted to ask Mark about the boy who lives with us. And poor little Colin never did stop asking about him, as long as we lived there. I asked Colin what the boy's name was, but he said, "I don't know, I didn't ask." I may have even had an interaction with this child. The same day that Colin first came looking for him, I was in the backyard. The backyard of this house is huge and open. I was standing somewhere near the middle when a small chunk of concrete came sailing out of empty space and hit me in the collarbone. With my eyes looking along the lines of the possible trajectory, I stooped down and picked up the concrete. I stayed in the yard for half an hour, a half hour that was filled with speculative minutes. No one ever became visible. It didn't matter. There wasn't any way for anyone to be able to hit me with such speed and accuracy from cover of the woods 400 yards away. Eventually I stopped wondering about the concrete. Not long after that, something else happened inside the house that seemed like it was beyond what I consider to be poltergeist activity. One day, while my stepfather was at an appointment with his VA doctor, I had what seemed to be to me a negative interaction with something. I was sitting in my room reading my email, and I heard footsteps pass in the hall behind me. They went in my mother's room, and I heard the light switch go off. I got up and walked into her bedroom, opened the door. There were no lights on, but everything was clearly visible since, as far as I can remember, it was around noon. I saw no one in there, but I knew someone went that way and didn't come out. Her closet door was shut, and I could see that the light was on. I went to the door and asked, "Mom, are you in the closet?" "No," said someone who was most definitely in there. It sounded like her. I thought to myself, what the fresh hell is this? I'm used to my mother's attitude, but this was a new development. I backed out of her room slowly, down the hall and into the kitchen, where I was able to see out the window from which you can view a considerable portion of the backyard. She was far out in the backyard pulling up weeds. She was not in the closet. I asked her when she came in if she had somehow heard me ask that question. She didn't know what I was talking about. I think that was the turning point for me. I decided to stop being an bemused bystander in my own house. There have been many times that I have recommended that people give rocks cleansing a try. That is because I used this method over the course of 3 days while my parents were out of town. Never heard a peep after that day. Story 4. This is the first time I'm sharing one of my stories. It's 3:30 in the morning. About an hour ago I woke up from a dream. My grandfather was in it. I walked into a church and saw him talking with a group of people near the altar, so I approached him and he was happy to see me. After he hugged me, he suddenly got tired and older looking, and even liver spots started showing up and his skin turned gray. I helped him to sit down, then I woke up. It bothered me and I couldn't sleep, so I went outside to look at the stars. Lately you've been able to see Jupiter and Saturn, but by this hour they were already gone. While I was looking up, I clearly heard footsteps walking a circle around me in the grass. Then they stopped on the pavement and I saw a shape of a person out of the corner of my eye. I turned and nothing was there to be seen, but they were still walking a circle that seemed to be 5 feet away from me. When the steps came down on the pavement, they made a clicking noise in the way that dress shoes or steel-toed boots do. I heard the train in the distance, and then I quickly walked back inside and locked the door. My maternal grandfather had been dead for 7 years, and we were never close. He and my grandmother were divorced in the late 60s, and I was much closer to her second husband, who I considered to be my grandpa. I can't imagine that he would be whatever is behind the footsteps. We didn't even know each other. Besides, I had the feeling that it was something else. I had been awake for over an hour before I decided to go outside, so I am reasonably certain that it wasn't imaginary. I live in the county in South Georgia, near Valdosta. There was enough light from the porch, so I know it wasn't a deer. It may not be interesting, and there isn't much on the supernatural side of it, but I think I'm done looking at the stars for the time being. Story 5. My brother died in a tragic accident several years ago. A few months after he died, my mother and I were sitting in her living room reminiscing about him when she suddenly asked me if my son, who was 10 years old at the time, would like to have my brother's black fedora hat. My brother liked hats, specifically the fedora, because when he was a teen he loved John Belushi and the Blues Brothers skits on SNL, thus developing an affinity for the black fedora. I was a bit surprised that she offered because I had not mentioned to my mother that my son had recently asked to get a black fedora. It was an odd request from him because my son is pretty quiet, low-key, and decidedly not one to wear a fedora. He and my brother were not close because we didn't see each other all that often, mostly just on holidays or birthdays. However, I'm certain my brother did love him. Furthermore, I had never discussed my brother's black hat with my son, and I don't recall seeing my brother ever wear it, although my son may have seen him in it in a photo somewhere at my mother's house. So when my son asked for one, I just thought it was one of those phases kids go through with hats. My mom gave the hat to my son that day, and we left her house. It was a short drive home, during which my son was grinning from ear to ear while wearing the fedora. My brother was very heavy on my mind during that drive home, and I felt a deep sadness. The news was on the radio, and it was mostly bad, so I changed the station in search of something to lighten the mood. The first station I switched to was playing Soul Man. It was my brother's favorite cover song that Belushi and Aykroyd sang in the skit. I found a lot of comfort in that. It was such a coincidence that the song came on. I had never heard it on the radio before, and I don't think I have ever since. Was it my brother giving his okay for my son to have something of his that was significant, or was it a mere coincidence? Who knows for sure, but I felt comforted and a sense of wonder. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. I'm 62 years old. The events below occurred when I was 12 through 13. They were so dramatic and real that I remember them as if they just happened. My large family was living in a house that was 103 years old at the time. My father was a violent, abusive, psychotic, and daily IV drug addict. I had 2 younger brothers and 2 older brothers. The oldest had moved out. My bedroom was upstairs and to the right. I tried to be in my room as much as possible to avoid my father's beatings. I read a lot, discovered Tolkien and sci-fi. I had an aquarium, chemistry set, and microscope. Probably rather like young Sheldon. Anyway, paranormal things started happening right away. I never saw a ghost or spirit, but I felt its evil presence. Sometimes I would get up to leave its presence, and other times I would just get up to leave the room for school, etc. I would be stopped in my tracks. I literally could not take a step forward. I never felt hands grabbing me and holding me back, or standing in front of me pushing me back. What I encountered was like a force field. You could not push against it like a wall and feel it. It was exactly like the sensation of trying to push 2 magnets together. Just no way to progress against it. Instantly it would fill me with such dread and such a strong feeling of absolute evil that it terrified me. This would sometimes last a few seconds and sometimes a few minutes. One time, after getting released by it, I started walking down the stairs. About halfway down it floated me down the rest of the stairs and set me down gently. I was shocked by that. It was a school day, and cereal, bowls, and milk were set out on the near end of the long table. I went to reach for the bowl, and it scooted 2 feet away from me. I tried again, and it did it again. I finally made my cereal. That was the only time that anything manifested outside of my room. Within a block of my house, on the same side of the street, were 3 funeral homes. I wondered if that was the cause of the problem. Whatever it was palpably evil, like demonic, whether a religious person or not. Strong, negative, hating evil. I was so glad to move away from that house. My youngest brother told me that when he was 10 and homesick alone, that a 7-foot lizard man that felt evil manifested in his room. He had waited 50 years to tell me his story for fear of not being believed. I believe him. He is the type that would rather die than tell a lie. I've seen few accounts of this force field type sensation on the popular paranormal shows and give most credence to these stories. Story 2. Let me start by saying thank you for reading this. It means a lot, and sorry in advance if this is really long. Brevity is not my strong suit. These details are, I promise you, very relevant to setting the story up. I have 2 families and they live across the country from each other. Ever since I can remember, my dad, being the piece of soggy lettuce that he is, always made me feel uneasy when I was with him. No, he never hit me or assaulted me in any way. He's not that soggy, but I always felt like we were never alone in the many homes that we lived in. This time in particular, I was around 7 or 8, and I was visiting my dad for the week in Oklahoma. I live in South Dakota, so I didn't visit often. My dad and new stepmom had just moved into a new home, and it was only us 3 and my dog. I had a small room with my bed against the wall facing my closet door. This is important. I had a small dresser with a TV that had an automatic shut-off because I could never fall asleep without it on. Another strange fact about being with my dad is that I was deathly afraid of the dark, just like any young kid is, but when I would stay with him, I always felt compelled to sleep with no lights on. However, I would always, and mean always, make sure that I had my closet light on with the door shut before I went to sleep. And this is the same in any house that I lived in with him. Every morning I would wake up with my door shut and light on, so I know my dad never came into my room and turned it off. So this was not a one-time thing. One night I fell asleep like watching some Netflix like usual with the same closet situation. I woke up at around 3 a.m. and at this time I didn't know what this meant, but to my surprise it was not good. So I woke up to my closet door open and the light turned off. I instantly felt sick to my stomach, with complete body chills. I know that this was not sleep paralysis because I was able to sit up and I could move my arms, legs, and eyes. I looked to the side where my dresser ended and I saw these freaking scary people with gray skin and red eyes. There were 4 men, 2 little girls, and 2 little boys. On the far left, there were 2 little girls that looked like scarily like me from the past when I went to Catholic school and wore green checkered jumper dresses, and they had long brown hair. In the middle closest to the girls were 2 identical men in business suits and black hair. The men to the right of them had all gray on, baggy sweatpants and baggy hoodies and gray tennis shoes. And to the right of them and on the end there were 2 little boys with identical clothes to the men in gray sweats. I about crapped my pants. The 2 men in suits started whispering to me, and the voices I eventually heard were threats to kill me and all my family if I didn't get them to leave in a certain amount of time. You don't have long, we will kill you. You better hurry. Hurry, we will kill you. They kept repeating until finally one of the little girls screamed and ran toward me, and they disappeared right as I opened my mouth to scream. To my surprise, it was my own scream the whole time. However, I know that I was not sleeping, as I could move and jump right out of my bed to run to my parents' room. My dad and stepmom were annoyed that I woke them up, but became scared when they saw I ironically looked like I had seen a ghost. But oh, not just one, 8. They, still being the trash bag filled with wet socks that they are, didn't really do much about it after that night. My mom doesn't really believe in this type of stuff, but when I told her, she looked terrified and simply prayed over me a few minutes. Well, that was my story with the paranormal. Sorry for the length, and thanks for reading. Story 3. This event occurred when I was a teenager living in Lawton, Oklahoma. I have never forgotten it. During one November weekend, I spent the night at my friend Steve's house. During this period, Steve's church was performing an all-weekend prayer vigil for a reason that I have since forgotten. Steve had signed up to pray during a 30-minute period beginning at 3 in the morning. On Friday afternoon of the previous day, Steve invited me to wake up with him and travel to his church to pray with him. I agreed, and after going to bed at Steve's house Friday night, we woke up at 2:30 to make the trip over to his church. Steve lived a couple hundred yards from the junior high that we both attended and his church. The First United Methodist was across the street from that same school. It did not take long for Steve's father to pack us up in his station wagon and drive us the short distance in the frosty morning to the church. The church was an enormous structure, and as we entered, I got the distinct impression that we were entering a cave. The only lights in the whole building were the candles glowing at the altar that the prayer pole had left during the prayer vigil. I could not see the ceiling, and after approaching next to the altar, I looked back and could not see the back of the church in the darkness. I could tell that Steve's father had settled into one of the back pews because I could hear him shifting around in the pew. There was a woman at the altar, and when she saw us approaching, she muttered a hushed hello and got up to leave. I listened to her footfalls and watched her disappear into the darkness. Seconds later, I heard her open the door. When she did, the street light at the front of the church briefly lit the interior of the church before the door closed behind the woman to leave us once more in the inky, candlelit darkness. I sat on the front pew behind Steve and watched as he knelt at the altar and began to pray. I do not recall him spending too much time at prayer before watching him grasp a nearby straw, light it on a candle, and use the lit straw to light a candle that was unlit. He then began to get up to join me at my pew when a cold wind from the back of the church blew over us, flickered the candles, and extinguished the candle that Steve had just lit. I looked at the back of the church to see who had just entered, but I could not see anything in the darkness. Steve was already facing the back of the church, so I asked him, "Who just came in?" "I don't know. We still have about 15 more minutes before my prayer time is over. It's too early for the next person. I didn't see anyone open the door in the back," Steve replied. "Are you already done praying then?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm not too good at praying for more than a few minutes," Steve said. "Well, you should at least go back and relight your candle. That gust of wind blew it out," I observed. "Where did that wind come from?" Steve whispered. "I don't know. I was thinking about going back there to see if your dad saw anybody, but I can hear him snoring in the back," I replied. "Stay where you are then. I don't want to be here at the altar alone while I go back to relight my candle," Steve said. Steve turned around and selected another straw from the altar and lit it on another candle. He then lowered the little piece of straw onto the candle that he had just previously lit. After lighting the candle, he blew out the straw and placed it back into the holder next to the candles. It was at this time another cold gust of wind blew into our faces from the front of the church, flickered the candles again, and again extinguished Steve's freshly lit candle, leaving all the other candles lit in their places. Steve looked back at me with a look of fright. I have to say that I was also a little frightened. I immediately got up and stood next to Steve and whispered, "Steve, I think we should pray a little longer this time. Move over, I'll join you." We both knelt at the altar and started fervently praying. I do not know how long we were there at the altar, but we were both presently disturbed by the sound of someone walking up behind us and patiently sitting in the front pew. I nudged Steve and watched him slowly light a straw and carefully place it upon an unlit candle. The candle lit. We both waited for several seconds to see what would happen. When the candle stayed lit, we both got up and walked back to the rear of the church. The man sitting on the front pew then took our place and knelt at the altar and started praying. After waking up Steve's dad, we all left the church, got into Steve's station wagon, and drove back to the house. The next morning, we told Steve's parents about what had happened in the church while Steve's dad was sleeping. Surprisingly, all that his dad could say was, "Well, I guess someone upstairs wasn't satisfied with your first efforts." It was just as good an explanation that Steve and I could offer for the night's events. Story 4. We have recently moved into another home. The last one ended up having a huge bug infestation that we couldn't get rid of. During the summer it happened to get extremely warm, which meant air conditioner running on auto, so it was nice and cool once the AC was halfway fixed, which in return allowed these particular insects to come out and feed on us. So we left everything behind and moved. The owners allowed us to break the lease because they failed to inform us the previous tenants brought those things in. They had failed to get rid of them successfully. Now on to the new one. This house is much bigger than the last. 4 bedrooms, huge living room, the washer and dryer in the same room. I'm laughing at myself for being so excited about that, simply because the former place had the washing machine in the bathroom and the dryer downstairs. Lots of work for weeks worth of clothes to wash. I don't allow myself to smoke inside the house, so my usual spots are either outside on the front porch or stand just outside of the back door, which is in the laundry room and connected to the master bedroom. In order to get to the back door, I have to walk through my bedroom through one door and walk through the laundry room. I can see directly into my room from the laundry room. One evening, I decided I was going to sneak a smoke before bed. I was standing in the laundry room facing the backyard, my back towards the bedroom, when I felt what I thought was my oldest son walk up behind me. I feel their energies, all of them are different, which is why I say my oldest sons. But within that second it took me to turn around, I realized he hadn't said anything to make his presence known. His normal thing to say is mother in an English-style accent. I turned around and I didn't see him, but did catch a glimpse of a shorter shadow run from one side of the door to the other. So I quickly realized it wasn't my son and ran towards the bedroom and looked towards the direction the shadow was running to. And of course nothing, absolutely nothing. This particular thing had happened twice already. The second time it happened in the kitchen while I was washing the dishes. Now we have a huge mirror in front of our sink, and that time I didn't see anything, just felt it come right up behind me. Our thermostat is constantly being turned down from 75 to 70. We set it to 70 during the evening so we can get sleep good, and 75 in the afternoon while we're all away. We return home to it freezing in the house, so we check the thermostat and it will be at 70 again. I know that's not cold, but when the house has been closed up and the curtains drawn all the way, it tends to get cold. The TV turns itself off at night. Only time it does that is when I decide to sleep in the living room, when my back and my neck have been acting up. My mattress is brand spanking new. I can't sleep on it half the time. I've gotten a huge bang at the door and the jiggling of the door handle, so my husband asks, "Who is it?" and looks out the front window. He saw no one standing there, so he opens it up and looks out the screen door. It's still locked, so there was no possible way our door could have jiggled without someone yanking and prying the screen door open. And believe me, we would have heard that. I told him, with my beliefs and experiences, not to open that door. If you see no one, leave it be. But he tends to get that wave of protect and see what I'm up against type energy flowing and didn't listen. Thus all the above happening after the knock at the door. Story 5. Let me start with some backstory so you can understand my full meaning. I've been in law enforcement for nearly 28 years. For the past 13 I've been a special agent. I've been on SWAT for several years and served my county overseas in the U.S. Army. I am a type A personality. I've worked homicides and hunted seriously dangerous men. I am hardwired to seek the tangible and find the truth. No one who has ever met me can say I easily rattle. Here's what occurred. I purchased a farmhouse in rural Oklahoma 9 months ago. It's about 7 miles from the nearest town. It's peaceful out in the country most of the time. I live alone at the moment, with my fiance moving down in a couple of weeks. My kids are grown, in college and working. 2 nights ago I went through my normal bedtime routine, checked the doors and set the alarm. All was quiet. I go to sleep about 11:30 p.m. I'm asleep for about an hour when I awaken by what I can only describe as a small child pushing the mattress of my bed down on the empty side a few times. I didn't see a child. I heard a giggle, then felt the movement. I recall asking, "What is it, baby?" like when one of your kids wakes you up at night. I then realized I was alone. and thought I dreamt it. In that place between awake and sleep, I felt no threat or concern really, and rolled over and went back to sleep. 2 hours later, at about 2:30 a.m., I felt the bed violently move several times. It jarred me awake. Once awake, it moved once more, and was coming from under the bed, pushing up. It moved my full body weight as well as the bed mattress and box spring. I'm kind of a big guy. That took some effort. I got up quickly. I sleep with a firearm accessible at all times, and like I stated earlier, I live alone during the week. The room is dark, so I grabbed the weapon and a flashlight. All the hair on the back of my neck is standing up, and I felt like I was not alone in the room. I went from condition white to condition red instantly. It immediately felt like I was in trouble and about to deal with a home invasion or something, and feeling like there is a real threat to deal with. I checked my surroundings and determined nothing is close to me. I jerked the covers off the bed so I could see underneath. There was nothing there. I fully expected to find a person. I swept my whole house, issuing threats and armed. I checked every room, closet, and space a person could be in. Nothing. I cannot accurately convey the level that this unnerved me. Since that happened, sleep has been less than easy. I did some research and have had the house heavily saged. It's been quiet since then, at least so far. There have been no geological anomalies reported. All I can say is there are still some things in this world that we don't understand. I can tell you without a doubt, I was not alone at 2:30 a.m. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Out of all my experiences, I'm surprised I haven't thought to write about my grandparents' house until now. Currently, they are living in a retirement home, but for 27 years they lived in a beautiful home in the woods in North Raleigh. 10 or more of those years I had spent nearly every weekend at that house with them from Friday to Sunday night. In all of those years, I never got over my fears. Just something about that house, or probably the property more like, I'm not sure, but I think they were the only people that ever lived in it. It was actually a really nice neighborhood, but it was heavily wooded in between each home. I also would like to add before I jump in this house, it was really fancy, nice walls and carpet, just great architecturally. Just in case anyone wonders if it was some old beaten up house, it definitely was not. The earliest memory of my fears was their windows, but only at night. This might be a common fear, I'm not even sure. They had tall windows that went from the floor to almost the ceiling in most of the rooms. At night, I was so frightened walking from the living room across the house into the guest room that I slept in. I would hold on to my grandma so tightly while walking with her. I think my biggest worry was imagining a creepy man being able to watch me or all of us, but we can't see him. They didn't have curtains, but they did have blinds, and they didn't pull them down in the beginning until I begged my grandma to when I got older, but still a kid. She thought I was so strange for being so afraid. My grandma is the most gentle, sweet, quiet, feminine little grandma you can imagine. I felt totally safe with her. It was just that house. They had an old furniture room that was directly next to the guest room I slept in. Oh, and by the way, I didn't start sleeping in there until around age 9. I slept with my grandma in their room, and we made my grandpa sleep in the guest room for the first couple of years I was regularly going there. Back to this old furniture room. There was an antique couch and 2 matching chairs, a Bible from the early 1900s that I have today, a creepy clown velvet picture hung up, and pictures of my grandma's family on the wall from her childhood. I was completely afraid of this room, or all of the rooms on this wing of the house, but this one especially. I pinned it on the clown picture, but now that I'm older, I'm realizing it's just that whole part of the house. I had toys in that closet, so I usually had to go in there if I wanted to get my toys out. When exiting, I had to run. Something inside me made me feel like I had to run, and that feeling lasted until my 20s. I'd run across the house into the living room where I felt the safest, apparently. I'd look back and, of course, see nothing had chased me. One particular day, I was in the bathtub and heard who I swore was my grandma walking back and forth outside of the bathroom. It was only us home. I had called to her to see if she'd pop her head in so I could ask what she's doing, but no answer. After my bath, I had gotten dressed. I found her in the living room doing Bible study. She said she had not been back there all day. That gave me chills because I know the sounds of them walking on that thick carpet. It's not too heavy, but you still just get familiar with sounds. I had my step-sibling stay with me for a weekend before they too heard the steps while they were taking a shower, but thought or asked if it was me. I had another childhood friend stay with me, and she got an awful vibe from the back rooms as well. But never my grandparents. They never felt what I felt. It only got worse when I was older. Not better, unfortunately. Still ran out of the old furniture room, and now was hearing a woman's voice praying aloud. That was only at night when I was trying to sleep. It only happened twice though, but extremely scary for me even at age 17. I just always felt like someone was in the guest room with me. I made it a routine to check under the bed before lying in it and inside the closet. Mind you, I was doing none of these things at my home with my dad and stepmom. I would lie there for what felt like an hour or more, just scared for my life until I would finally pass out into my night's rest. Even though I felt so uneasy at my grandparents', I loved them so much that I never refused to go there. I just dealt with the fright for years just to be with them. I just wonder who was watching me. Was it my grandma's mother who had passed away long ago? Was it something from the past on that property? I'll never know. I have so many amazing memories growing up with them and visiting that house, but the feeling that house gave me was not like anything I've ever experienced. Story 2. This event took place about 3 years ago. My mother had just purchased a ring from a new age store called Earthbound, and shortly after she experienced very weird things. One night my mother was sleeping in her bed when she woke up and noticed a girl standing at the end of the room next to her closet. The girl was wearing a long white dress that went down to her ankles, and she had long black hair that covered her drooping head. Yes, very stereotypical, I know. When the girl noticed her, she floated towards my mom, moving very fast. When my mom looked at her face, her eyes were like black holes. Her mouth was the same. Suddenly the hole from her mouth opened wide as if she was screaming at my mother. My mom jumped back and turned the light on, and she disappeared. This went on for about a month, she said. I, for some reason, paid this no mind, despite the fact that I am very fascinated by the unseen world. I personally wish I would have took interest in it when it happened. Lots of strange events happened because of that ring. For example, when my mom would be in her car, she would realize the mirror would be directly pointing at her face. The car mirror is very sturdy. It does not move, mind you, so this was very weird indeed. She was also hit by cars multiple times also. After a while, my mom decided to throw the thing away. This worked for about a week. There were no encounters at all during this period of time. However, after that week had ended, the girl came back. My mother was searching throughout her jewelry box one day and saw something. The ring she had thrown away was sitting there on top of all of her other rings. After that, my mother and sister decided that they would put the ring in a bag of salt and throw it away, hoping that would rid the spirit for good. The spirit never has returned to this day. However, I cannot help but wonder what will happen if this ring is freed from that bag. Will the girl return, or will it find a new person to haunt? Story 3. This will be my fourth experience I've ever had. This was in 2009. I was 19, hanging out couch surfing at a friend's house at this age. I'll rename this particular friend Miles. He lived in what my dad used to call the gingerbread house. My dad would drop me off sometimes, an adorable little home behind his grandparents. Miles and I went to high school together, but didn't become friends until right after. But once we did, we hung out every single day in his tiny little cute home. For the most part, things were normal and boring as teenagers are always bored, but there was also not so boring parts. That's where this demon comes in. Miles said this demon told him that his name was Jacob, and even though I was into and am into the dead, I didn't really believe him at first. He said he learned its name during a Ouija board session, but I remember that night too. There was so many of us hanging out, and a couple of us thought he was moving the piece. But I do know this demon, which to me was technically just a bad person when he was alive, because he often messed with us. even during the day. The memories sound so unbelievable, but I was there. It always sounded like this ghost was in the kitchen, being heavy-footed, or rough, slamming things out of nowhere. More grunts than I can remember. But the most disturbing day had so many things happen in a short amount of time. For starters, a few of us were just hanging out on his couch, all looking at Miles's TV screen, which his computer was hooked up to, so we were all just watching YouTube videos. Miles was in his computer chair, and his bass guitar was leaning against his desk. No one was moving, besides the bass just randomly leans forward and does a couple of spins before our eyes and goes back into its leaning position. We all obsessed over that for a minute until right after his pack of cigarettes, which was on the desk near the bass, levitated maybe 10 inches or less into the air and fell back down. We were all shouting, "Did you see that?" I'm sure one kid dramatically runs around in disbelief. Rightfully so, because this was not stuff you see every day. Minutes later, a friend of ours randomly let out a sudden scream and grabbed onto his ankle and immediately lifted his jean leg, and there was human-looking teeth marks. He was bleeding. We couldn't believe it. Pretty sure that same day another friend was pulled off of Miles's bed by his feet and did the hardest butt plop, and he just ran out of the house. I witnessed this entire day. It sounds so ridiculous, but I can't forget it. A year after that time, I was somewhat homeless, yet living for only a month on a couch, just one town over from Miles. There was maybe 7 of us total in this one trailer, and one girl who lived there gets a call from Miles, and she brought it to our attention that he was on his way over with his girlfriend to stay the night. There was already 7 of us, so we were thinking, why? And where will they sleep? But he showed up very shortly after. I remember a guy of the house opens the door, and there's Miles and his girlfriend coming in to tell us that they were told to get out, not just once, but over and over. Each time got more louder and aggressive. I'm sure half of the people there didn't believe him, but after everything we've gone through, I definitely did. He said after all the stuff, this was the first he was told to leave his own home. He was shaking and just distraught. I couldn't understand how he could ever sleep there to begin with after everything we went through in that small home. 12 years later, we're 30 years old, and Miles doesn't believe in ghosts. I just can't wrap my head around that. He's denying such a time that I can never forget. Did he black all of this out? How can you be a skeptic when there were tons of witnesses in that time of his life? It's not like this was all word from his mouth, but my very own eyes too, and others. I know a couple other skeptics that have had experiences they've shared with me, but then go say ghosts aren't real. Typical. Story 4. It's been quite some time now since I've shared one of my experiences, so I figured it's finally time that I let people know this one, which I've been wanting to share for a while now, before I forget too many details about it. I can't remember exactly if it was this past spring or the end of winter, but it was around that time period of this year when this experience had happened. It was nighttime, and I was getting ready to go to sleep, with my husband already sleeping next to me, and my daughter was still up in the living room. As I was about to lay down, I'm in bed in the sitting position before you lay back to go to sleep, I noticed I started to feel when I know that there is someone around me, or something around me, meaning a spirit of some kind. And being in the dark at the time didn't make me feel too comfortable knowing that there was something watching me that I could not see in my room. I could feel that whatever was there was at the foot of my bed, which is in front of my bedroom door. The door was closed, but with my daughter still up and in the living room, there was light coming in from the bottom crack of the door. I was thinking to myself that I don't want to look too hard and see something that I don't want to see, but still decided to look at the foot of my bed and noticed this black mass looking thing in the corner of where my TV stand and bedroom door are. I just told myself that I was probably seeing wrong and that it wasn't really anything there, so I just hurried up and laid back to try to go to sleep and ignore what I just saw at the foot of my bed. As I was laying in bed trying to go to sleep, I remember hearing what I thought was my daughter coming into the room to climb in bed with us. and waited for her to start to get in bed. But when I didn't feel her do so, I looked up to see what she was doing and saw that she wasn't in the room. I laid back down thinking how weird that was, because I could have swore I heard her open the door and come in. Eventually, I fell asleep and still remember the nightmare I had that night. I have 5 ducks as our pets that we love and spoil a lot. I take great care in looking after them, to where I even make sure to lock them up in their homes at night to keep them safe from predators out there. Living in the middle of the woods. Anyways, my point being, I care very much about them and their safety. That night I had a bad dream of them being hurt somehow, and me freaking out and screaming and crying over finding some of them dead and the others hurt, not knowing what had happened to them. My husband ends up waking me from this nightmare because he said I was making noises in my sleep that sounded like I was having a bad dream. I'd like to add that I don't normally make noises in my sleep, so this isn't something that happens often. I told him I was glad he woke me up because I was having a horrible dream. I was still very tired and could barely hold my eyes open. As I was sitting up in bed, continuously dozing in and out, fighting myself to go back to sleep in fear that I would start back up in that bad dream again. After however long I was doing that, which roughly was under 5 minutes, my husband asked what was I dreaming, and after telling him, he began to tell me that I had woken him up making noises in my sleep, when he noticed, as his eyes started to adjust to the dark room, that there was what he described to look like a black mass hovering over me as I was sleeping, and freaked him out to see, staring at it to figure out if he was seeing correctly or not. He said that's when he woke me up and saw the black mass move from above me across to the other side of the room. He said as I was sitting up, he saw it start to come back towards me and get close, and then back up a little and come back towards me. When he finally had asked me about what I had dreamed, it just disappeared. I told him how freaky that was to hear, because I couldn't keep my eyes open and it seemed like it was trying to mess with me again when I kept dozing in and out, making me wonder what it would have done if I had gone back to sleep then. I told him that it was most likely what was making me have my bad dream then, since it was hovering over me while I was having it, like someone was affecting my dream. I told him that it was creepy how he had also described what he had saw as a black mass, because I then told him what I saw, the same thing at the end of the bed near the door right before I went to sleep, which he was unaware of at that time. So for him to describe seeing the same thing that I had saw made me think I really did see something near our door. Now whenever I have bad dreams like that, I can't help but wonder if that black mass is above me again or not. My husband hasn't seen that above me since, but that doesn't mean it hasn't come back though. It's not like he is always watching me during my sleep. Normally my husband is the one that is affected while sleeping by whatever, because he has had many sleep paralysis episodes and has seen and felt something messing with him, waking him up, so he was surprised to see it messing with me this time. I keep wondering what it was and why it seemed to be making me have bad dreams, like it somehow feeds off that or something. I don't know, maybe it wasn't affecting my dream, but for whatever reason was hovering above me. It's just weird how it didn't go away when I woke up, but only across the room, and then started to get close to me again when I started to fall back to sleep. Maybe someone else might know what this is all about. It's not like this happens to me a lot though, so I don't know what to think about it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. Story 1. We've had a history of living in houses with strange occurrences, so many that we used to think, was it us or the house? But it's been house after house of supernatural experiences. I have come to think, for now, it's the houses, not us, that are haunted. One reason I believe this is because in 2016, we were seeking help from a team of exorcists, priests, and lay people in that field, as we were having a lot of issues with one home. A woman with paranormal abilities we consulted, who referred to herself as a seer, told us it was not us, but the houses. We had been living in a very active house that to this day is difficult for me to talk about, and changed me and our family forever. We did move, thankfully, to spiritually safer locations. More recent houses we lived in did have suspicious activity, but I questioned things, and I am very skeptical. From 2017 to 2019, we lived in a house built in 1901. You just gotta wonder about all the history of these turn-of-the-century beauties witnessed. Loved the house, but it needed work. A month after moving in, my son Tom, who was 13 at the time, had an experience that jarred him. He was in middle school, which had an early bus pickup time. The routine was he got up just before 6 a.m., he'd eat, dress, get ready. Point being, he'd be fully awake. I'd help him gather his things, and I would then go back to bed before I had to start getting his siblings up for grade school bus. As soon as I laid back down, my son came running up the stairs and jumped into the bed with me in distress, screaming there was a ghost downstairs. My big boy was white and shaking, clearly upset, hysterical. At first I thought he was joking, but the more he went on, I realized he wasn't joking. He said he went to the living room and saw a shadow man close to 6 feet tall, all in black, standing in the middle of the room, looking at our record player, which was one of those newer models that are designed to look old. They are brown and boxy with that fake antique look. Anyway, the shadow man was looking at it and then eventually walked into the record player and absorbed himself into it and disappeared. It didn't bother or engage Tom, but still, the trauma of our earlier house that things were very bad with, my son had a panic attack at the mere sight of another possible ghostly form. Logically, I thought maybe it was a real man who broke in, and maybe he was hiding near the record player, crouched down. I went downstairs, turned all the lights on, and did a search of the rooms. Nothing. Meanwhile, Tom was literally terrified. I kept saying, "Are you sure it wasn't your brother?" "No." "Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" "No." "Are you sure you didn't fall asleep and dream it?" "No." Tom never saw it again, but he still feels what he saw was real. No one else in the family ever saw anything else while we lived there, although my husband swore he heard voices and footsteps in the hallway on several occasions. I also think I heard footsteps coming up the stairs and down the hallway on several occasions, but I guess you could say I just didn't want to allow myself to entertain the reality of that. I suppose it's the possibility that Tom was having a flashback of sorts, or it's also a possibility that something followed us from the previous home, or even something that was attached to our then 1901 home. In 2019, currently, we moved again to a rental house built in 1940. It's nice, but it has a lot of stairs. There are a series of cement steps and landings from the street to the house. I didn't want to move there because of the steps. I joked saying there's so many steps it's enough to cause a heart attack. Our landlord half laughed, but said one of his workers and painters, when preparing it, was walking up and had a heart attack and died inside the doorway at the foot of the staircase. So terrible. Because of several obligations, one being my elderly relative is in walking distance a few houses down and in need of constant care, we agreed to move in anyway. A few days after we moved, junk mail addressed to the previous owners came. They had an unusual name, so I decided to Google them. An article popped up saying the man who lived here died in the home. He was in his 30s, a father, loved history reenactment with costumes. The picture on the article showed him standing at the bottom of our staircase. There were costume hats hanging on the wall behind him in a decorative pattern. I looked at the wall and there were holes there where the hats had been hanging in the picture. That kind of gave me the willies when I looked at the photos. Just something about it gave me a connection to the person, and I felt like I could sense him. The next day, kids at school, I'm home alone and I see a ball explosion of blindingly white light in the spot at the bottom of the footsteps. I just stared at it and thought, did I just see that? Oddly, it was right at the same spot that I saw a previous owner standing in the photographs. I'd say it lasted a full 5 seconds. Over the next few days, early mornings, I'd see a smaller, quicker 2 to 3 second version of the same thing, a flash of white light in the same spot, but smaller and fainter. After the first month, I haven't seen it again. Is there a plausible explanation? Could it be an electrical issue? There are no outlets in that location. I'm looking for plausible other possibilities. If it was something, was it the man who lived there? Or the worker who died in the home? One of my daughters, Sylvie, was very affected by spiritual activity in previous houses. In one home, there was a thing in her closet, a shadow man. That experience has traumatized her to this day, so the topic is very sensitive to her. She came to me recently and said she thinks this house has something in it. I try to reassure her with logical things she is experiencing. I'm still unsure if she is imagining things, still traumatized by early experiences. We have talks often of how much the shadow man has affected her. For her, it's on a level of terror that we have to see therapists. So it's really hard for me to discern if it could be happening again or just a replay in her mind of the prior past incidences. Mostly, she says, with this house, it is in the basement. Her chore, which she really loves, is laundry. She loves to wash and fold everyone's laundry and finds it relaxing with the clean, fresh lavender oil scents. So she will go alone to the laundry room in the basement. Here, she says something touches her from behind, touches her hair and shoulders. She does not like it or find it cool. It bothers her a lot. She says doors open down there and she hears footsteps. I tell her to pay it no mind, but that's more out of reassurance. I'm not sure if it's real or not. I guess I don't want to believe it. Could she be reimagining it from prior trauma? We talk openly about it, and mostly I just want to think that no matter what, I'll protect her and she will be okay. I'd like to hear theories about it. Story 2. This happened to me a couple of months ago. I was with my friend, and around 10 o'clock, her stepmom asked if we wanted to go to a graveyard. We said yes and got in the car. We drove past a couple of graveyards before going to one a couple of miles away. Once we got close to the graveyard, we noticed we were being followed by a car. We decided to drive around the block to see if we could lose the car. After a while, the car disappeared, and we went back to the graveyard and pulled in. We got out and noticed a fresh grave. After being there for about 5 minutes, we saw something on the hill and decided to leave. We got in the car. We were about to turn out of the graveyard. We then heard what sounded like a chainsaw, and the car stopped. On the touchscreen in the car, a message started flashing. It said something like power connection failure. My friend's stepmom had just got the car, and it was brand new. She tried changing the song and putting it in park, but the car wouldn't start or stop. After a couple more seconds, the car started again. We left quickly, and we were all freaked out. It was now like 12 o'clock. When we got back to her house, we decided to use her spirit board. Nothing happened until the planchet spelled out graveyard. We then said goodbye and were very freaked out. We still don't know if the car thing was related to the graveyard or if it was just a malfunction. We were still freaked out. I think the car incident was paranormal, and I think it has to do with the fresh grave. But what do you think? Just thinking about it and writing it makes me feel a lot of negative energy. I need help. Story 3. When I was just a little kid, my older sister and I would always stay over at my grandparents' house. At that time, I was only 5 and she was 7. I had another sister, but she was too young to sleep over. Anyway, whenever we slept over, we had to share a room and the bed. The room that we stayed in was on the second floor next to a bathroom in my grandparents' bedroom. To a normal person, the room would seem off. There wasn't anything wrong with it. The first time my sister and I slept over, like I said, I was 5. Some say that I was too young and don't remember it too well, or that I just made up what happened. I thought that too until my mom gave birth to another daughter. Then 7 years later, she starts to sleep over at my grandparents' house, but not in the same room, since I would always end up waking everyone in the house up by screaming. My grandmother blocked the room off from the rest of her house after I told her about the shadow right behind the light. Now you might be wondering what happened or what shadow. Here's the story. My older sister and I were getting ready for bed the first night over at our grandparents' house. We were so excited but also nervous because it was our first sleepover. Anyway, time passed by quickly and we were all tucked in bed. Our grandfather went to bed early while our grandmother stayed awake. On the other hand, we couldn't fall asleep. After staying up and talking for a few minutes, my sister grew tired even though she was wide awake. Another minute passed and she was asleep. And just like that, I was alone. I rolled over to get more room on the bed, but I ended up frozen. I saw the lamp. It was a tall lamp in the room, and light shined in on it from the window. But that wasn't what made me freeze. There was a figure, or as I like to call it, Shadow Man. The Shadow Man wore a top hat, and that's all I could make out of the figure. I stared at it for what seemed like an eternity, and yet it didn't move. So me being a kid, I thought it was just a shadow from the window shining inside the room. But I was wrong. Right as I was about to turn back over to face my sister, it moved. The Shadow Man was moving towards me, so I did the only thing a 5-year-old would do at a time like that. I screamed, and it went away. I don't know where it went, but it was gone. Of course, my whole family woke up and came into the room. Then I realized it wasn't just 9:30 p.m., it was 4 a.m., right on the dot. This went on every time I slept over, but then I got older and it stopped. That's when my grandmother shut down the room. Now I'm 16 and I still see the Shadow Man in my nightmares, so I do ponder if it was real or not. But one thing is still off about it all, because every once in a while, everyone in my house will bolt up at 4 a.m. and we all don't know why. What I do know is whatever the Shadow Man is, it isn't good. Story 4. I was preparing dinner tonight before my girlfriend came to my place. In the corner of my eye, I saw her walk from my dining room down to my bathroom. As this figure, who I thought was my girlfriend, passed me, I said hello. She turned, or it did, and looked at me and walked by. After a minute, I went back to check on what I assumed was my girlfriend. There was no one in my room or bathroom. When I got to my son's room, there was an extremely cold draft passing through me, so I stopped and decided to turn around and go back to cooking dinner. I was so bewildered, I wanted to leave my dinner and everything just to get out of my apartment and not go back in. To make matters worse, as soon as I walked into the kitchen, my girlfriend texted me and said she would be 15 minutes late. This is not the first time I saw a shadow person or ghost here. I'm just concerned now because it's the first time it decided to take a human form. Should I be concerned? I'm going to sage my apartment tomorrow. Is there anything else I should do to this apartment? My concern is whatever this is trying to make contact with my son. He is 9 years old and is on the spectrum. He's entirely too trusting when it comes to anything. He told me about the old lady in the apartment he sees, which I believe is my girlfriend's grandmother, which is weird since she lived in Alabama and I never met her or saw a picture of her. After I described the old lady ghost to my girlfriend, she said she saw her grandmother here also. I'm lost on what to do. Story 5. So before you know what happened recently, you'll need to know this. My grandfather was crazy into witchcraft voodoo. He used to draw pentagrams on the basement floor, put my aunt, uncle, and mom inside them, perform spells on them, and then throw them all in a closet. He used to call himself a wizard, and I think that it has affected all of our lives tremendously. My mother ended up passing away very suddenly in her 20s. My uncle is very unhealthy, and my grandmother became a paranoid schizophrenic. Yesterday was Halloween. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. in a horrible sweat, in the middle of a panic attack. I was having a dream that demons were trying to get me to let them into my soul, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This was not sleep paralysis, as I could move, but I could not get the thoughts out of my head. Then I saw a dark shadow in my closet, and I couldn't fall back to sleep for hours. Fast forward to 2:30 p.m. that day. I just got out of the shower and heard a loud bang on the wall. The radio turned itself on. From the radio station, it was on to static and turned itself all the way up and then back down again. Now it's the next day, and the little girl I babysit keeps apparently telling her mom that she had a friend here named Jeremy. Nobody here is named that, and I realize after talking to her today that she is not saying Jeremy, She's saying my mom's name. I don't know much about demonology, but I do know that sometimes demons pretend to be angels to get what they want from you. Any input or opinions on this would be greatly appreciated. Story 6. This took place in my apartment in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. It was almost 7 p.m., and I had to go get my boyfriend from work at 8. I planned on cleaning and finishing the laundry for the next 45 minutes, so I put in my headphones and started cleaning. I was listening to a song called Demons by Tech Nine, which really isn't a demonic song. You have to understand that artist to understand his music. Anyways, I bent down to pick up one of my kids' toys, and as I was standing back up, I saw, as clear as day, a very obese white man with a white shirt and dark shorts just sitting in the corner of my hallway outside my daughter's room. I only saw him for a split second. I even second guessed if I was seeing things, but it was just too real for me to conclude that it was just my imagination. I grabbed my daughters and we went to get my boyfriend from work early. I was freaked out, but not too scared because the man didn't really look scary or threatening, and he wasn't doing anything but sitting there. About 2 hours later, my boyfriend and I are laying in our bed, and my daughters are sleeping in their room next door. As I'm telling my boyfriend about what happened, all of a sudden there was a boom and all the power cut out. This woke my daughters up, and my boyfriend went out to investigate. What happened was that the breaker had tripped, and the box was wide open, and the breaker box was in the exact spot that I saw the man sitting earlier. This freaked my boyfriend out. We basically just laid in bed the rest of the night. No sleep at all. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed. I would like to give a shout out to my very first patron, Rodney Williams. Thank you, Rodney. My first patron was all the encouragement I need to keep this going and never give up.